Coming up on today's episode of the Salesman Podcast.
3 types. If you want to have the opportunity for vast reach and to develop an opportunity to develop a voice of authority, written, audio, video.
Hello Sales Nation, I'm Will Barron, host of the Salesman Podcast, and welcome to today's episode. On today's show we have Mark Schaefer, and we're talking about curating, creating, and essentially using content as a tool to enhance and improve your personal brand, both in sales and out of sales as well. That all becomes apparent within the show itself. Mark is a speaker, an author, and a consultant. You can find out more about him over at businessesgrow.com. He's got a podcast, so if you enjoy this show, it's well worth subscribing to his. It's more the marketing side of things, but there's definitely value for us salespeople as well. That's called the Marketing Companion Podcast. And with that all said, let's jump into today's episode. Hey Mark, and welcome to the Salesman Podcast.
I am delighted to be here, Will.
Good stuff. I'm delighted to have you on, Mark. We're going to dive into your books a bit later on, but first, and I want to avoid this contentious issue at the moment of whether salespeople should or shouldn't be creating content, because guests that have come on the show, it's been a 50-50 split. So putting that to one side, do you feel that creating content from a personal branding perspective, is creating content the fastest and potentially best way to do that right this moment, both online and offline?
So, you hit me with a lot of interesting things there. First of all, I find it hard to believe there's a 50-50 split. I think creating content, or let's say creating content or curating content that can help our customers, I think it's critical today. I think if you're not doing that, you're almost competing with an arm behind your back, and you're kind of giving up a lot to your competition. So let's just say I feel pretty strongly about that, and I've done a lot of sales, social sales training, and I know there is resistance to the idea. A lot of people want to stick to the old ways, but I think if you don't have some sort of digital presence today, you're going to be invisible. So in terms of, where do you start and what's the fastest way to get going? One of the things that I emphasize is that to build a personal brand and to build this digital presence, you need to have a source of what I call rich content. So let me give you a quick example. A few years ago, I wrote a blog post that kind of went viral. And a few weeks later, I got a call from a reporter from the New York Times who wanted to quote me from that article. And the question I ask people is, could that have ever happened? This vast awareness I received from the New York Times, could that have happened if I only posted on Facebook or I only posted on LinkedIn? She never would have found me. So the core of a profound digital presence has to be some sort of written content, audio content, like we're doing today, or video content. So, and maybe visual, like photography, but generally, for most businesses, and especially for salespeople, it's got to be one of those 3 types. If you want to have the opportunity for vast reach and to develop an opportunity to develop a voice of authority, written, audio, video.
You've covered a lot of ground here, Mark. I want to just backtrack slightly because there's 3 things that you've just talked about which I think we can dive into further, and putting into context with the audience as well. Perhaps there is, I imagine, a 50-50 split of salespeople who are curating content that's coming in from their marketing teams, and then what they're doing personally as well.
Good.
Some of it might be amateurish, some of it might be good, but then there's going to be a chunk of people who want to become the most knowledgeable salesperson in the industry and become a thought leader, and perhaps then from the sales team they go to being a senior salesperson and have a team underneath them, or however it works. So I think everyone wants to use content. Some of the pushback that we found for doing the show and having different people on is that there is a pursuing and an increasing storm behind the fact that salespeople should be selling and perhaps marketers should be giving them the content. So that's where the split comes in. But ignoring all that for a second, because that's a conversation in itself, Mark.
Well,
and we can
you got to have me back
on
the show then.
You genuinely more welcome to come back and talk about that. You'll have some good insights.
We need to dive into that one. Go ahead. I'm suspending that question.
Okay. You've covered a few things here. One is a vast reach versus perhaps a salesperson needs engagement rather than reach. That's one thing I want to look at. And I'll put these in a structure in a second that we can answer them. Something else you mentioned was your core or rich content, whether it's going to be audio, written, or video. And we'll come on to that again in a second. But I think the place to start, and you alluded to it then, was should we be curating content, for example, for LinkedIn and LinkedIn alone? Should we all have a personal blog? Or should we be going, and considering this is for the individual salesperson, not a company as a whole, should we be just trying to get out everywhere on every platform to grab as much attention as possible? Is there a way for the salesperson which is going to be more beneficial than the others?
It's fun. Will, you are asking me questions that require 1 hour answers. But let me try to be succinct. First of all, there's no cookie cutter answer. I mean, there's no one answer that fits every situation. For example, I'm working with some pharmaceutical salespeople that are doing a great job curating content because that's the best way to help their physician customers. They're very, very busy people, and this is helping them save time and providing a great service to their customers. I've done many different kinds of sales jobs. I've ranged from developmental sales, which is basically, a wide open, the world is the possibility, all the way to having one single customer. I was an enterprise account manager for one single customer. So there's not one answer in a world where you're just in developmental sales or you're launching a new product. I think it makes sense to try to become a voice of authority and create content that's very, very helpful, and to try to create a voice of authority. In our world, most searches for a product or service begin on the internet. And if you don't have some sort of not just a presence, but a profound presence, you're going to be missing an opportunity. You're going to be virtually invisible. In the other extreme, where you only have one customer, connecting to the key people at that enterprise level certainly on LinkedIn, on Twitter, maybe even Facebook. I find people will respond to you on Facebook when they won't respond to you on a call or an email. I don't really quite know what the psychology is there, but I've got examples where salespeople have created amazing, deep connections with customers and potential customers on Facebook. So there really is no one cookie cutter answer. You need to look at what's your end goal, what's going to be the benefit of that presence.
I know, just to pitch and chime in on the Facebook side of things, this is clearly a B2B sales business podcast, but we've had more success on Facebook than anywhere else. And I think some of the psychology behind it is that people perhaps got their guard down slightly, or people are in the routine and the mindset of replying to their friends and family on Facebook, so they just fall automatically into it. So we've got a Facebook group, and I get messages. I get more emails than I do Facebook messages, but I reply, interestingly, to more of the Facebook messages quicker than I do to the emails. So that probably puts it into context from my perspective. But I want to get back to this point for a second, Mark. And again, I appreciate there's no answer that is just the be all and end all. But it's something I get asked a lot, and I don't know. You're the expert, so I'm going to parlay it onto you. Should salespeople be creating their own blogs or just living on these platforms?
Well, personally, I believe that everybody should. I don't want to limit it to blog. Let's just say create content. because you can certainly develop a personal brand. We see it all the time on video or a podcast. So let's just say, should we be creating original content? And I feel strongly that we should, because it's the only asset, the only personal asset we really own today. Even if you're happily employed, we don't know what's going to happen in the future. And the creating that presence, it also creates a network. And that network might lead to new business opportunities, new sales, or it might lead to a new job someday. And I've seen so many examples where, well, I'll give you one just from this week. There's somebody who has a blog. They follow my blog. I follow their blog. We've kind of become friends through the content, through the blog. We wouldn't have known each other without that content connection. Well, he was the vice president of sales and marketing for a packaging business, doing very, very well. To our utter amazement, the company got bought. They had too many chiefs. He got laid off. And now I've got some connections in that industry that may lead him to a new position. So you never know what's going to happen. And that's how we really build connections through our content. The content is really the catalyst that makes so much happen on the web.
Okay, another question I get asked, and I lean specifically one way, and I'll tell you about that perhaps once you've given us your answer to this, but should this content that we're curating, should we be going for a big reach? Should we be trying to reach everyone in our industry? Or should it be super and even hyper specific to a kind of one-up what marketing are doing? Should we be creating content and curating content for individuals rather than just the industry as a whole? What I'm getting at here is, do we want reach or do we want engagement to sales professionals?
Some of that decision is actually going to be dictated to us. One of the things I cover in my new book, The Content Code, is when you're looking at a content strategy, branding strategy, even a personal branding strategy. One of the first questions you have to ask is, how crowded is the niche? So if you're going into a market, or if you're selling into a market where people aren't creating a lot of content, that is an amazing opportunity. An amazing opportunity. It's a potential gold mine. So why not create content to own that? So that, when Google or when someone is asking questions about that market or that niche, it leads to you. It's a huge opportunity. Now, in our world today, that information density is starting to increase in different verticals. So our strategy may be dictated to us, where, as you say, we need to really concentrate on something that's very targeted. And in most cases, that's the case. And in that case, you're right. I mean, it is about connecting and engagement, because look, business is still based on, we buy from who we know, who we like, who we trust. And creating content that helps perpetuate that is an amazing opportunity for all of us. We all have the opportunity to create our own power, our own influence on the web today through the content that we create.
How do we decipher content which is, and I agree with you on that, I think engagement is more important than reach for salespeople. Well, reach is more important,
good. I was
perhaps
sweating.
For the company.
I'm glad I passed that test. I was sweating over here.
From that perspective, though, what's the difference between engaging content and just content for content's sake? And I see it in what I'm doing in the sales industry, and I can talk about this as an example of, I see every day throughout my LinkedIn feed, X ways to cold call, or X ways cold call's dead. And I did about 3 months of these kind of posts, but they were, if anyone's read, and the audience will have read, the listeners will have read a bunch of these, I'm sure. I always started with a story about myself, how I failed, how I got better from it, and kind of dug myself out of whatever hole I got into, and then X tips. they did pretty well, and we get about 5,000 hits on the website every day just from those, nothing to do with the podcast. So, and it's nice residual attention, I guess, over time. However, to put that into context, there was no comments on them. They didn't get shared very much. And again, to put it in context, I did a video yesterday, which I'll link to in the show notes. It's a minute long. It's called How to Cold Call, and it's a collection of, it's a ironic take on how to cold call. You don't learn anything from it. It's just a bunch of ways that I procrastinate when I go to cold call. And there's obviously that humor side of it. Just in the past 12, 13 hours by the time we record this, since last night when I uploaded it, it's had about 25,000 views on Instagram and on Facebook.
Fantastic.
And I'm just sorry now that I didn't link it stronger to the podcast, which is what I'm trying to advertise underneath. Mm-hmm. But the reason I tell that tale, Mark, is that so many comments, so many people sharing it, so many people adding their name or friends' names underneath it, which then allows you to have a conversation as you divulge and go deeper into all of that. Mm-hmm. And so the worlds apart. How do we, as content creators and salespeople, know and which route do we go down? How do we know whether something's going to be engaging or whether it's just another post that is just going out there?
It's a really interesting question, Will. It's one that I've been thinking a lot about. And one of the things that I've observed is that the engagement on my content has been going down. And that doesn't mean I'm not successful, though. And one of the reasons I think is again, this idea I have in this book, the content code around what I call content shock, is that when there becomes so much content, our own individual effort becomes diluted in the whole industry. And so we may get a smaller share of the comments if people are commenting other places. The other thing that's quite interesting is I think mobile works against us. So it's a lot harder to engage when the content is consumed over a mobile device. And the other thing is that research shows that between 70 and 80% of the people who are sharing our content, which I would argue is the most important metric, the content being shared, because that represents advocacy. 70 to 80% of the time, it's shared in a way we'll never see it. It's on an email. It's on a text message. It's on a private message. It's something to alert somebody else in the company. I've got examples where people are printing out my blog posts and hanging them on the bulletin board at work. That doesn't show up in the metrics. Is that engagement? Yes. Is that advocacy? Yes. So there's a lot of complexity going on here that's really pushing down engagement. But it doesn't mean it's not happening, and it doesn't mean it's not happening in different ways. The other thing to be successful today, we have to distribute our content. You just mentioned that you promote your content on Instagram. Instagram is a fantastic way to reach people in a different way, but the engagement level on Instagram is relatively low because it's visually oriented. People just kind of scroll through. They may like it, but they may not comment, or you may not even know if it does anything. So it's getting more difficult to measure engagement, but it doesn't mean it's not happening.
Should we be that bothered about measuring engagement? Because I'm in two minds. One, my background is in science and chemistry. It's all data-driven, computational chemistry to narrow it down even further, which is literally just numbers and algorithms. So when I see that X post does better than this post, even if I prefer and I thought the first post was better content, more useful, I'm getting dragged into this pathway of, well, this gets more engagement or more shares or whatever it is, so we should create more of that. Is that the right way to go about this, or should we just create content that we know is, and it sounds like it's a stupid question to ask, but should we just create content that we know is good, or should we be chasing the numbers?
I don't think it's a stupid question at all. I think it's an extremely keen question and a very relevant question. And I think I'm kind of a data geek like you, Will, and But I think we need to keep our eye on the long term. The data shows that to create a successful content-based presence that results in sales, it's about a 3-year effort. And the first year, the research shows that even in the first year, you will get an increase in awareness. All right. About 80+% of the people that are doing this in the first year, which is amazing. You get an increase in awareness, but only about 35% can say, yes, I received a financial benefit from that. So we need to be looking at awareness as a key metric. And that may show up as, is our audience getting bigger? Are we getting mentioned? Those are not fluffy metrics. It shows we're heading in the right direction. In the second year, we need to be looking at more, deeper kinds of engagement. Are we getting mentioned by people who really matter to us? Are we getting retweeted? Is our content being shared from people who really matter to us? Are we getting more subscriptions? So this is showing that we're moving from just awareness to reliable reach. We know that people aren't just, seeing us randomly, that people are starting to opt in. They're starting to subscribe. So those are important metrics. Or are people sticking around? Are our page views going up? Or is time on site going up? Are subscriptions going up? Then maybe in the third year, we need to be starting to tie this to financial metrics. Are we getting leads? Are we getting conversions? Now that could happen in the first year. As I said, 35% of the people who start in the first year have a bump in sales. So it could happen. But for most businesses, it takes about 3 years to really start getting those financial benefits. So it's not like advertising. It's like networking. It takes time to develop those relationships and really see the financial payoff.
For the salesperson listening to this then, Mark, they're happy to commit 3 years as a huge experiment. Perhaps they're happy to commit an hour every evening, 2 hours every evening, wherever it is to create content. In that year, number one, because there'll be people listening to this now who are getting riled up and they've heard all the hype, you're putting it into context and they go, yes, I want to do this. I feel like this is going to help my personal brand. It's going to be an asset, as you said before, and I'm going to do it. So in year one, should they be curating a few bits of really outstanding content or lots and lots of, let's say, mediocre content just to drive awareness? Because surely the more doors that are out there or pieces of content that are out there that people can find naturally, you're going to have more things coming to you to perhaps find the better content later on, perhaps?
Well, I think certainly quality is essential because it is a reflection of who you are and your brand. So you can never let people down. I can't emphasize that enough. You have a promise that you're keeping through your content, and that is, what is your promise? I'm always going to be helpful, or I'm always going to be interesting, or I'm always going to be entertaining, or I'm always going to solve a problem for you. But whatever your content promise is, you can never let people down. Never. Because it's not just creating content. It's a battle for attention. It's a war. And if you create one piece of crappy content, you're losing a battle in that war. So it's a really a blend that you need to create quality content. And again, a lot depends on the type of business and how crowded the niche is with content. But I mean, I would shoot for maybe 2 great pieces of content a month. If you can eke out, a little bit more, I mean, that would certainly help. But never let your customers down. Trust is what builds an audience. Trust is what moves a needle. So we can never breach that trust.
How often, or what percentage would you say, from your experience or the consulting effort that you do, of people want to dive into this and expect results in the first week, and so spam out a load of stuff and then it doesn't work, so then they drop it, versus how many people have patience?
Well, I mean, there's a great correlation between people who really understand what they're doing and persistence and success. And there's also a big cultural impact here, Will, because salespeople generally are coin operated. You're not going to work, and that's great. You're not going to work on any activity that isn't going to contribute to that quarterly number. Quarterly, you got to grow, 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 grow. So it's difficult to change the mindset, the corporate culture, perhaps, a personal culture, perhaps, and think of, instead of sell, 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 we need to help, help, help. Because if we create content that sells, 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 people will run away. They're sick of it. But if we reach out in an authentic way, in a personal way, as you said, have the courage to tell your own story, maybe even share your own vulnerability about how you're learning, how you're growing. People they'll run to you. They'll be attracted to you like a magnet, because people, they're seeking help. They want to know, how do I make money? How do I save money? How do I have a healthier life, a happier life, a more fun life? If you can help them do that, they will run to you and they will be attracted to you. But if we're only in this sales mindset of sell, 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 instead of help, 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 we will fail.
Massively loaded question here, but want to round off this part of the interview. And I think it's important to put this across, and for me not to say it, and hopefully you to say it and agree with where I'm going with it.
Otherwise, you're always it's putting me to these tests.
is a vulnerable or piece of content where you're being vulnerable, you're being authentic, you're being yourself on a rubbish webcam, or average quality webcam, you're talking to it. Is that likely to move the needle more than a piece of content where it's super corporate, super boring, but super well produced, and images and things flying everywhere and background music? Is one of them more likely to succeed than the other?
Well, I mean, I think the company, the brand, the person who is the most human will win. The most human business will win in the end. The technology is just a means to the end. We have to find ways to use technology not to set a divide between our customers, but to break down divides. And that is the great differentiator today. That is the differentiator that makes people successful or makes people completely frustrated in their activities. If you try to be corporate and Hollywood and reading a legally approved script, I'm not saying you ignore legal. Legal people are great, lawyers are great. They keep us out of jail. Listen to them. But if you're very scripted and very robotic, that's not human. People want to know. I mean, those days are over. Jingles and slogans and ads and PR spin, it's over. There are no more secrets on the web. There's no more patience for corporate speak. They want to know you. They want to know the people behind the brand. They want to know what you stand for. They want to know your story, your values. And there are lots and lots of great examples of that. Even in big companies, it is possible to scale humanity. It is. The most successful businesses today aren't B2B, they're P2P. How do we connect our people with the people who need us, the people who are suffering, the people who are searching, the people who need us in some way? And the key to that is to have the courage to be human and connect in a human way. And you know what? That's natural for salespeople. You just have to view content and the social web as an extension of who you are and what you do best.
Love it. What a way to wrap up the show. And I've got one final question for you, Mark. It's something that I ask everyone that comes on the show, and you'll have some unique insights with your background in sales and everything that you do now. If you could go back in time and speak to your younger self, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give him to help him become better at selling?
The best piece of advice I ever got about selling is that you don't necessarily need to have all the right answers, but you need to have the right questions. So sometimes the best thing to do is not go into a situation and try to pontificate and have all the answers, but to ask questions and help the customers come to the right conclusions, which will, lead to your products and your services. So that's an approach I've certainly taken in everything I do, from teaching and marketing to speaking and consulting, that I don't have all the answers. But when you just ask the right questions, that can lead to an emotional connection and a lot of engagement.
Good stuff. Well, with that, Mark, and everyone who is riled up and excited to start creating content after the last show, tell us a little bit about the book and then also your podcast as well, because I think there's going to be a lot of people who will pause this, jump over and subscribe to get more of a rounded knowledge base to all that we've talked about.
Well, I would certainly love that. So I've written 5 different books. I've written the best-selling book on Twitter, which you have there.
Yep. I read this came out quite a while ago, but I read this.
Yeah, I think that's actually the first edition, but there's a new edition out.
Okay.
I've written then the book on blogging you have there. It's the best book on blogging. I wrote a book called Social Media Explained, which is kind of foundational principles, and my new book is The Content Code, which tells the story of how to cut through with your content in a overwhelmingly dense information world. My website is Businesses Grow. You can find my blog there. The thing I think that distinguishes my blog is I take very practical, rational approaches to social media, digital marketing, and how we use it in our businesses. And I also take a forward-thinking approach there. So you'll see content there that you won't see anywhere else. The podcast is called The Marketing Companion. I do that with my friend Tom Webster. It's I think the thing that distinguishes that is, first of all, it's hilarious. And then second of all, we have 50 years of marketing experience behind us. So we do a deep dive on a topic every week that has to do with social media, digital content, sales, marketing of some kind. It's very, very popular. So visit my website, Businesses Grow. Subscribe to the blog and podcast, and say hi to me on social media. I'd love to hear from you.
And we'll link to all that in the show notes over at salesman.red. And with that, Mark, I want to thank you for your insights and thank you for your time and thank you for joining us on the Salesman Podcast.
Thanks, Will. Thanks for your great questions today. It was fun.
And there we have it. Mark, thank you for coming on the show. We'll have you back on to dive into a few of these things in more detail in the not too distant future. Thank you, Sales Nation, as always, for tuning in. I appreciate your attention. And if you haven't already checked out yesterday's show with Craig, it's well worth a download. We're diving into the differences and what we can learn from either side of the world of entrepreneurial selling and startup selling and the B2B side of things. So with all that said, without further ado, I'll speak to you all again tomorrow.